Hello everyone, today we're going to talk about negative number addition and subtraction word problems, and then we're also going to talk about absolute value and absolute value to find distance. So let's start with some word problems, everybody's favorite. Really, the thing with word problems is you have to highlight your keywords, and sometimes you might need to read the problem a few times to understand exactly what they're asking you. So the first problem says zombies lose limbs, mutants grow limbs. Mutant zombies do both. Today, a certain mutant zombie grew 5 limbs, lost 12 limbs, and grew another 2 limbs. How many limbs does the mutant zombie have compared to yesterday? Well, clearly losing limbs means that it is a negative, and growing means it's going to be a positive. So it says today a certain mutant zombie grew 5 limbs, that's a positive 5, then lost 12 limbs, so I'm going to add a negative 12, and then grew another 2 limbs. So now we're just going to solve it. We're going to go left to right. 5 plus negative 12, they're different signs, so we subtract. 12 minus 5 is 7, and I have more negatives than positives. And now I'm just going to bring this piece down, negative 7 plus 2. Again, different signs, so we're going to subtract. 7 minus 2 is 5, and we have more negatives than positives. So your answer would be negative 5 limbs. Okay, here we can see that we've got basically a number line, a vertical number line. It says Amanda lives in Fairbanks, Alaska. She records the low temperatures for 5 days. Which day's low temperature was 9 degrees Celsius colder than the low temperature on Friday? Well, let's take a look at the low temperature on Friday. That was at a negative 4. And if it's 9 degrees colder, you have to ask yourself, am I going to add 9 to it, or am I going to subtract 9? Well, if it's colder, that means we're subtracting. So minus 9. Now we have to follow our rules for subtraction. I'm going to keep, change, change. This becomes negative 4 plus negative 9. Now I have same sign, so I'm going to add and keep. 9 plus 4 is 13, and I'm going to keep my negative. So which day was negative 13 degrees? Wednesday. So that would be your answer. Which day's low temperature was 9 degrees colder? That would be Wednesday. Let's try another one. 3 baby penguins and their father were sitting on an iceberg 0.5 meters above the surface of the water. The father dove down 4.7 meters from the iceberg into the water to catch dinner for his kids. What is the father penguin's position relative to the surface of the water? I like to draw vertical number lines for situations like this. So let's say that this is 0 and this is 0.5. So that's where they're sitting right now. And then the father is going to dive down 4.7 meters. If we're going down, would we be subtracting or would we be adding that? Well, clearly I'm moving into the negative side, which means that I would be subtracting. So I'm going to write my my problem, 0.5 minus 4.7. I'm going to do keep, change, change. So that becomes 0.5 plus negative 4.7. We have different signs, which means we subtract, and I have more negatives than positives, so I know my answer is going to be a negative. And then 4.7 minus 0.5 is going to leave me with a negative 4.2. And that is their position relative to the surface of the water. Okay, so that does it for the word problems. Let's talk about absolute value. So the first thing is we need to review what actually absolute value is. Absolute value is the distance from 0 on a number line. So for example, as you can see here, I've got the absolute value, and notice these bars right here, that's how they represent absolute value with those bars on either side. So the absolute value of negative 2, well, let's think about negative 2 on a number line. How many units from 0 is negative 2? Well, clearly it's 1, 2 units. Same thing, the next example is the absolute value of 3. Well, how many units away from 0 is 3? It's 3 units. One key thing to remember about absolute value is that it should always be positive because we're talking about distance, and distance is always represented using positive numbers. So the next thing, just real quick, there is also a video here, YouTube link on absolute value. If you still are having difficulty understanding what absolute value is, it's a brief 3-minute video explaining and giving some visuals on absolute value. Okay, so absolute value to find distance. Well, we have this little formula here. It says the absolute value of A minus B equals the absolute value of B minus A. So let's talk about what that actually means. Let's see A equals -5 and B equals 3. I'm just saying hypothetically. So let's plug those numbers in and see if this actually works. So I'm going to plug in -5 minus B, which is 3, and that should equal B, the absolute value of B minus A. So 3 minus -5. All right, so if I were to do keep, change here, this would become plus negative. So that would give me the absolute value of -8. And here, keep, change, that would be the absolute value of 8. Well, what is the absolute value of -8? 8. And what's the absolute value of +8? 8. So it works. So basically what they're telling you is that it doesn't matter if you have A minus B or if you have the absolute value of A minus B, that's also going to equal the absolute value of B minus A. And that makes sense because if we think of a number line, if I were to plot -5 and +3, think about their distance from each other on a number line. Well, 5 units plus 3 units gives us 8 units, so it makes sense. All right, let's take a look at some of the types of problems you can expect under this skill. It says, which of the following expressions represents the distance between 1.7 and -1/2 on a number line? Well, let's say hypothetically, 1.7 is A and -1/2 is B. We have our formula, which is the absolute value of A minus B should equal the absolute value of B minus A. So all we're going to do here is just plug these values in and see which one matches. So I've got the absolute value of 1.7 minus -1/2, or we could do the absolute value of -1/2 minus 1.7. Well, let's take a look. Does anything look just like what one of these sides? Right here, I can see that those are basically identical. I just didn't put parentheses around my -1/2. So the correct answer here would be B. Which of the following expressions represents the distance between C and D? So instead of A and B now, we're using the absolute value of C minus D equals the absolute value of D minus C. So let's go ahead and plug those in. -1/4 minus 3/4 equals the absolute value of 3/4 minus -1/4. Let's see, do any of these answer choices match? Well, clearly A does not because this is addition. And look at B. B is identical to what I have right here, which means that B would be the correct answer for this one. Let's try another one. Natasha and her 2 dogs were walking on a perfectly straight road when her 2 dogs ran away from her in opposite directions. Her beagle is now 25/4 meters directly to her right, and her Labrador is 51/20 meters directly to her left. Which of the following expressions represents how far apart the 2 puppies are? Let's think about this. Basically, where Natasha is, let's think of that as 0. So if I were to draw a number line, her beagle is 25/4 directly to her right. So that would be 25/4. And her Labrador is 51/20 to her left. Which of the following expressions represents how far apart the 2 puppies are? Well, let's make this A and let's make this B. I'm just going to plug it into that formula. 25/4 is clearly positive, and 51/20 is clearly your negative. So we've got 25 over 4 minus negative 51 over 20. And then we've got the absolute value of negative 51 over 20 minus 25 over 4. So let's see if either of those match. Here I've got 25/4 minus negative 51 over 20, which perfectly matches B. Let's choose one to answer. Clearly it's not A because that would be minus negative 25/4, and 25/4 should be a positive because it's to the right. Let's try a couple more of these. A baby mango tree stands 2.6 meters above the ground, and its roots extend 7/5 meters below the ground. So clearly your above ground is your positive, and your below ground is your negative. Let's make this A, and we'll make that B. So if I plug these in, that would give me 2.6 minus negative 7/5. Or we could do negative 7/5 minus 2.6. Which of the following expressions represents the vertical distance between the top of the mango tree and the tip of its roots? Well, do we see anything that identically matches? I do not. This one should be minus negative. Here, this should be a negative 7/5 because it's below ground. So this one would be C, none of the above. And one last one. Which of the following expressions represents the distance between 4.35 and negative 2 1/5 on the number line? Let's make this one A and this one B. So that would be 4.35 minus a negative 2 1/5. Or we could do negative 2 1/5 minus 4.35. Do we see anything that matches that identically? I can see that this one looks just like that one. So the correct answer here would be A. So that does it for those two skills. The correlating note-taking packet pages will be pages 18 through 21. Again, you can watch the videos on Khan Academy if you would like to see additional examples, and please feel free to email myself or Mr. Lab if you have any questions. Have a great day, everyone.